Hear Hardy and Michael Ford are coming. Ellen Wilkinson, the red flag, she is humming. We get around not as much as Dominic Cummings, even though he's driving blind. We are the Labour grassroots, where like-minded folk dwell. From countryside to city, it's warm and it's witty, the antidote to Pretty Patel. We are the Labour grassroots, time to raise a racket. The future is as bright as Crispin's red jacket. This is the space where we all go hell for leather, free from all the biased BBC blether. Like track and trace, we're better together, just as Carrie and Meg. Yeah, we got all the people from Inverness, Skegness, Farrow and Furness, Chester, Leicester, Cirencester, Shrewsbury, Oswald Street, Swansea, Hernackley, Barnsley, Beccles, Nottingham and Eccles. We are the Labour grassroots, time to plant some grass, where we've always had social distancing between us and the upper class.
Welcome to Labour Grassroots, and I am here again with a red sparkly jacket, and today we are going to be talking about the very serious matter of lobbying and corporate lobbying in particular. We've got a busy show, and I hope you've all had a good week and you're ready for this intense education and discussion. And to start the show, I was lucky enough to speak to Tamasin Cave of Spinwatch, which is an organisation which monitors lobbyists. And earlier today I spoke to her, and she told me about the background to lobbying, and she also told me about how it affects politics and the whole system. So this is a video I've made of my conversation with Tamasin. And
so lobbying is in a sort of neutral form. Lobbying is any attempt to influence the decisions of government. That's how we define it. So in theory, if you wrote to your MP or signed a petition or whatever asking for a particular policy change, you would be lobbying government. You'd be trying to influence their decisions. So that's what lobbying, the activity is. But what I look at and what my colleagues look at is the lobbying industry, which is the professional, commercial, people who are paid to do this for a living. And it is a substantial industry in the UK. It's worth about, I mean, it's an estimate, but about 2 billion quid in the UK. There are many, many firms, and the majority of them sort of circle Westminster. So you've got the House, you've got the centre of government, you've got the Whitehall departments, and you've got Parliament, and they sort of fan out from there. And you will find lobbyists in lots of different organisations. So everything from the think tanks that surround the House of Parliament in Whitehall, in Westminster. So in St James's around there, you've got all the think tanks, people like the Institute of Economic Affairs, but then also the IPPR on the left and the right. And then you've got all the lobbyists who are based in public relations companies, because it is closely associated with the PR industry. They are in the comms. It's all about persuading. So they are kind of professional persuaders in these comms, huge global commercial firms. And then you've got lawyers, accountancy firms, the management consultancies, and their job is basically on sort of 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, is to make sure that government does what the people who's paying their bills want them to do. If you're working in a company, for example, like Portland, which is one of the big commercial lobbying agencies, they will have a list of clients that are paying them. Now, the majority of their clients are going to be corporates. They are going to be commercial companies, because they are the ones with the most of the money. But of course, also trade unions lobby, NGOs lobby. It's just they've got less money, and it's quite interesting looking at the geography of it, because actually you see the NGOs are sort of in the cheap seats further in North London. You know, then the closer you get to Westminster, the more commercial and corporate it gets. Proximity is important, because what they are trying to do is surround our politicians with the messages that they want our politicians to hear, to persuade them to take particular policy decisions, and that can be anything from privatising the NHS on the one hand, so opening it up to more commercial contracts, or it could be tiny little things that we never even hear about. So a tweak to a tax regulation, or the tiny change to planning laws, or whatever it is. And most of the time, most of this activity we don't hear anything about, and it seems fairly insignificant, but it could be millions of pounds to that particular corporate that's lobbying for it. Lobbying is always an investment that serves your bottom line. So it's all about profit making, and that's what corporations do. So it's not good or bad, it's rational, it's a strategic investment it's another way of making money, effectively, is what it is. There's nothing sort of magical or mystical how you kind of achieve influence. It's always, it happens through a series of steps and tactics and techniques. And those tactics and techniques range from everything from influencing the media, which is why you have a lot of former journalists who work in these companies, because they know how the media works and they can phone up their former colleagues and get certain stories in, or stop certain stories from going in that harm their corporate interests, or the corporate interests of their clients. Getting access to government is the key thing. So if you want to be able to influence government, you need to be able to talk to ministers, which is why you have this enormous revolving door, very well-oiled revolving door between the lobbying industry and both Whitehall departments and Parliament. So you will get former special advisors who will then go and work in the lobbying agency and often come back and work in government. You'll get former ministers working in the industry, but there is a very sort of close relationship between these people, and sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish whether they work for these corporate clients in a lobbying agency or for the public interest. And this is where the public interest gets lost. So the temptation is to want to ban it. The problem with that is that it is a democratic right. When I started out, I talked about the activity of lobbying being, petitioning government and persuading them to do what you want them to do. And we need to have that right. It's a very important right within our democracy. The problem is as it happens in reality, is that it is dominated by these commercial interests. So it's about saying how can we basically open up the lobbying industry so that we have more public scrutiny. So transparency is one of the first steps that you need. And
what about the law that was passed in the last few years?
It was David Cameron, but it was the statutory register of lobbyists. They brought in a law which it was a complicated tale, but it became the gagging law, and a very, very cynical move. The government decided it was supposed to be regulating corporate lobbyists, and it decided to attack trade unions and charities at the same time. They introduced a sham register, basically to tell us all to piss off and go away. So we have a very, very poor register, which has no information on it whatsoever. So they went through the whole rigmarole of legislating to introduce something that does absolutely nothing. So we have no oversight in this country.
So they dressed it up as a thing to combat lobbying, and it's actually worked in their political interest to stop Labour getting sort of funding and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was brilliant. It was a brilliant piece of media manipulation as well, because we were after this register of lobbyists, and the headline in the Times ran something like "Lobbyist Law Gags Charities," it was brilliant because it divided the NGO world. Suddenly they were like, "Don't gag us," and I'm like, "No, it's not about you. It's about corporate lobbyists."
How has that affected your campaign in Spinwatch? Because it looked like they'd changed something, and then you found out they hadn't.
Yeah.
But people now say they've done that law.
It had the effect of killing it. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant in terms of cynical ways of basically killing what was quite an effective campaign. We had an awful lot of parliamentary support, but in the course of 10 years lobbying against the commercial lobbying industry, I saw their entire kind of toolbox rolled out and sort of effectively directed at us. So we were everything from name calling, I was called a conspiracy theorist, that was the least of it actually, to divide and rule tactics against our coalition, and eventually we lost our funding. So it was a pretty harsh campaign. What's important to note is that the lobbying industry as I said, it is a rational thing it is another rational way of making money. And they really don't care whether it's a Conservative government or a Lib Dem or a coalition or a Labour government that they are lobbying. And so the way that they work is, a lot of it is about relationships, and they will build relationships with whoever is in power, whoever looks as though they're likely to be in power. So what was interesting was when Jeremy Corbyn became leader, the industry was suddenly just in shock. I mean, if you saw some of the headlines and the responses to it in the lobbying industry press, it was like, oh my God, nobody knows this guy. We haven't seen him come up the ranks. We haven't spent any time courting him or courting his advisors, or we haven't got anybody on our staff who once made tea for him or anything like that. So they couldn't do their jobs. And whatever you think of Jeremy Corbyn, he was absolutely perfect for severing this link between the commercial lobbying industry and government. He obviously had friends in the trade union movement and in the NGO movement, so he's not like he was kind of outside of the whole of the lobbying industry, but particularly the commercial corporate lobbying industry had, it didn't have these long-standing connections or knowledge about who this guy was and how he's going to work, and crucially then how you can get to him and how you can approach him. So that did sever the link. And, there's no doubt in my mind that there were people within the commercial lobbying industry who fought vigorously against him becoming leader. And now we have a return to normality in that we have a Labour leader who has got people who've worked in the corporate lobbying industry as his advisors. So they now have, the door is open again to various people.
And I've got on the call, we have Tosh. Are you there, Tosh?
Yeah, I'm here, Crispin.
So what do you know? I didn't know much when that was happening. I kind of wasn't aware of it, but what was the effect of that Act of Parliament on lobbying?
The effect was massive. I mean, look, corporate lobbying, I expect it with the Tories. I think they're a class-based party. They're probably the most successful class-based party in British history. In fact, I'm sure they are. Now, Labour's lobbying comes from trade unions and other like-minded bodies, cooperative party and cooperative movement and stuff like that. Now, just even prior to this law coming in, we had to ballot our members every 10 years just to keep what they called a political fund. But that fund wasn't just for political, party political things. If we wanted to get involved in a campaign like the fairly successful campaign we run with the other rail unions of getting freight off the roads onto rail, freight on rail, we couldn't do it unless we'd got the backing of our members every 10 years to give us the support to have what they called a political fund. Now, when the biggest hit to us when this legislation changed was that we had to then get every member to sign that they wanted to continue. It weren't just a matter of the majority who bothered to vote getting it in. We had to get every member. So the amount of people paying into political fund, which is what we use for lobbying, was massively reduced because people had to physically sign to do it. And at the same time, the corporate lobbyists for the Tories can just do what they like. They're not answerable to anybody. I suppose in a way they are. And one thing we have been able to do, we get involved as trade unions, we get involved in the occupational pension schemes. I sit on a pensions committee myself. And what we started doing there is we start putting pressure on the AGMs of the companies. So we started doing it that way, using the pension funds that our members have. But one thing I remember is, as I say, I expect the Tories to be lobbying, getting corporate lobbying. I expect them to be working and taking funding from businesses and some pretty disgusting organisations, to be quite honest. But what I'll never forget, it was during the time when Ed Miliband was the leader of the Labour Party, and we'd put a motion up, as Aslef, we'd put a motion up to the conference saying that organisations within the party, like not Momentum, sorry, it's a Freudian slip there, like Progress, which were working, just a sectarian body working to go a particular way, shouldn't be allowed. They should produce all the finances all the records and stuff. And myself and the General Secretary went into Ed Miliband's office. We were called into Ed Miliband's office, and he wanted us to withdraw it because, to be quite honest, Progress, Sainsbury's were behind it, Lord Sainsbury's, and he quite openly told us he needs their money. Now, what changed, what massively, we did withdraw it in the end, probably one of the worst things we ever made, decisions we ever made. But what changed that, you know, was Corbyn. When Corbyn came in, as has already been said, that the corporate lobbyists weren't interested. They didn't know him. They'd not taken him seriously. The trade unions and other bodies had, as has been said earlier. But what he did, he massively increased the membership. He got us out of debt without the corporate lobbyists. He got the funding in. And I don't know how we're going to stand in future, because a lot of people I'm talking to have left the party or seriously considering it. And it seems to be a job we're doing day in and day out, is trying to get people to stay in the party, as we've moved further and further back to being under the thumb, if you like, of the corporate lobbyists. I mean, and when you look at Labour MPs who were involved, Barry Shearman set up his own corporate lobbying company, and we're taking money from that. We've got Angela Smith. She was getting money from the privatised water companies. This is a Labour MP. You know, she was working for them. She now works as a lobbyist. Chuka Ramona, another one. How had we got so bad? And I think these are just people who are pushed forward and given all the help by the lobbying companies. Know whichever party gets in, they've got friends they can go and talk to. So I think it really is, it's worse than ever with this government, I think. And Dominic Cummings and his mates getting all these contracts. It's not, they don't even try and hide it. They're that blatant with it.
Yeah.
But it does go back a long way. And I think when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, what's around now, you know, that was corporate lobbying from the slave companies. There's the companies who benefit from slavery. Companies that went out, companies like the Indian Rubber Company, who really treated people badly over in India. They were paying the government at the time. They were corporate lobbying him then. So it's not a new thing, but it's something that we have to change. And yeah, corporate lobbyists should have no place in the Labour Party. They should have no place in Parliament. But lobbying, as has been said earlier, lobbying is something we all need to do, and we all do it. When you go and see your MP, you go and see your councillor, that's lobbying.
Yeah.
But it's lobbying in a fair way.
But I'm going to bring someone else in who's actually quite supportive of lobbying, but I'm not sure what kind of lobbying, and be interested to hear. Bob, are you there? Are you a supporter of the system of lobbying, or?
I'm not a supporter of the current system, and ministers need to have information fed into them. Now, there's a difference between information that will enable them to justify policy and information which is used, in their view, well, in the corporate lobbyist's view, to set policy. That, I think, is wrong. But the thing that's really missing is the transparency. Ministers need to talk to people. They need to talk to lobbyists. They need to talk to trades unions. They need to talk to individuals. But there is no record of what is actually being lobbied. It was talked about. It was the public, not public affairs, one of the public committees was calling for exactly this, a record of who lobbied who. And that was back in, I think, 2004, something like that. But there's nothing that you can find out about it. So in terms of lobbying, in terms of getting information to ministers so that they can make decisions, and MPs and so on, I think has to happen. But it has to be much better controlled than it is at the moment.
All right, because I was hoping you'd say something really controversial and we could all just jump on you, but you let me down there. You let me down there, Bob. I thought we were going to have some sort of clip I could put out and it would go viral.
Well, there's a local one. We've got Syngenta, who run Gillett's Hill, are wanting to build 4,000 homes on greenfield sites, and they've been lobbying the council. But the decision then is that they're lobbying for a lot of work, a lot of business coming into the borough, and without that, the council might miss out on an opportunity. Whether the council decides they want to do it or not is up to the council, but and listening to locals lobbying about it. But that information has been put there for them to make a decision.
Right. Okay, well that's a good link to what I'm going to talk about next. So what I've also what I've also discovered from a conversation I had last week with Stephen Cowan, the leader of Hammersmith Council, who was on the show last week, is he had this really clear idea that lobbyists are unhelpful for councils to negotiate with, because they actually give bad deals for the council. And I've recorded another interview with him. It's a bit shorter than the last one, in case you've got problems with long interviews. And why is it that Hammersmith Fulham don't take hospitality? Is that from lobbyists? What's the reason behind that?
Well, we took the view that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And actually that was a fairly considered view when you look at the way the system works, because when I was the leader of the opposition, which was 2006 to 2014, we obviously scrutinised a lot what the Conservative administration of Hammersmith Fulham was doing. And one of the things they weren't doing was building any affordable housing whatsoever. Indeed, they had an ideological position against affordable housing. And every single planning meeting, they would say they checked the viability reports, which are something we should talk about, and no possibility of ever doing affordable housing. Now that period, shortly afterwards, from 2008 to 2016, was the biggest property boom in post-war British history. Just owning land in that part of London would make you rich, just sitting on it. And if you managed to get it changed in land value, so you owned a derelict brownfield site and turned it into luxury housing, you could get extremely rich even without building the luxury housing. So we were very much of a view that this area needed to be significantly addressed. And one of the tenets we just thought is we don't believe there's any need to go for a free lunch. And whilst I don't believe necessarily that there was any link between the awful policies of that Conservative administration and the vast amount of hospitality they took, it was shocking to look at their hospitality register and see free trips to the proms, free trips to tennis matches, free trips to football matches, free trips to horse racing, lots of dinners. You know, that level of relationship with a property lobbyist, I just don't think is healthy. I don't see any purpose for it. And you're sent into office by a public who expect you to always put their needs first. And I was of the view, just left, sorry about the pun, nasty taste in my mouth. So we never took it. We made a position of trying to stop the council taking hospitality, and we're in opposition, and we've never taken any hospitality since. One developer who we were in a particularly tough negotiation with, and he explained to me that I'd made a great impression on some of the people in Beijing, and that I should fly out there to give a speech, and he'd be happy to facilitate that. Apart from the fact, I don't think anyone in Beijing's ever heard of me. You know, there's that sort of ridiculous sort of thing goes on. We had another developer sort of name dropping famous people from California and saying, you know, would you like to meet any of them? They're going to be at our restaurant soon, which we own. We'd like to give you a luxury table for you and your family. I'm like, why? You think, you know, you like me that much? Or is it because I'm the leader of a council and I'm elected to, or the leader of a party and I'm elected to represent people? You're going to try and talk to me about how you see me doing that. So we just took the view of no, thanks very much. We only deal direct with business owners, so we will not talk to a lobbyist. We don't want to see some middle person coming along and possibly inviting us somewhere for a social or some hospitality, and then finding out what we want and talking to the business owner. We'd much rather talk directly to the business owner and negotiate directly. So we think that's had an important difference. I think the second thing is my view is I don't think the public sector is particularly good at negotiation. As someone who trained negotiation before I did this job, I was shocked when we got into office about just how shabby the standard of negotiation had been from well-meaning officers, but they'd never had any training in negotiation. They had no real experience of it, and they were up against people in property developers, some of which their pure skill set is negotiation and adding value to land. So there was a mismatch. It's like we were sending sheep in to deal with wolves, you know, And my view is during that property boom, particularly the one that finished in 2016, London lost millions of pounds of genuinely affordable housing and other benefits, other public benefits, because we were just inadequate at negotiating with developers. So we sent all our officers onto negotiation courses. I wouldn't let anyone negotiate until they'd done a course. And our job is to make sure that they firmly act within the law and firmly get what's right for the citizens who sent us here to do their bidding.
How much money has Hammersmith Fulham Council made since you made this policy of not having free lunches?
It's 685 million roughly, which we've put to good use. As I always point out to the developers, it's not like the money's going to me. I'm on £38,000 a year, but the money, I don't get a bonus, but the people who get the bonus are the residents I represent. And so far we've used that money to build the largest number of genuinely affordable homes in a decade, the largest number of law enforcement officers on the streets, free breakfast for all school children, new youth clubs, new food banks, and many other social good, which I think will be an important stalwart in protecting people and improving lives of the residents I represent.
Now, I'm going to ask Tosh, because Tosh is also a councillor here. Tosh, what did you think about what Stephen Cowan was saying there about property developers and councils?
I think Steve was quite inspiring, to be honest. It's a breath of fresh air to listen to a leader of a Labour council speaking like that. It's something that all councils should aspire to. And don't forget that I'm a councillor in Doncaster, and it doesn't seem, I'm sure people maybe forget now, but we had Donegate in Doncaster where the council was corrupt. Labour lost its majority eventually, because what we had then I was interested in the thing you were saying about getting people trained to negotiate, because we did get people into council positions who perhaps were out of the depth and had had no training. And I think they were hoodwinked, well, I'm pretty sure they were hoodwinked by people taking them out for the free lunches and stuff. And it ended up bringing down a Labour council. Well, we've got a Labour council back again now, and things are very different and it's a lot tighter. But you have to be answerable to people. And like the old saying goes, there's no such thing as a free lunch. But Stephen there inspired me.
Yeah, I mean that sort of allegation of free lunches and local politicians being wined and dined and planning and property, the whole issue with the property boom, it has really, I think, had a bad impact on all councillors, including Labour councillors. And we have seen in the 60s and 70s, we had the scandal that was in the north with the developer there who was making lots of money and giving backhanders to councillors. Yeah. It's really important that we have integrity, isn't it? In the Labour Party, I mean, Angela Rayner's talking about getting people to stand for council. We have to make sure that we are seen as clean and good people, and those lobbyists seem to be very manipulative. So it's a tricky thing, and what Steve said is right. Just don't come in. We don't want to know about you, because they're quite slippery characters. Now, what I'm going to do, because it's more entertaining to do this, is I'm going to introduce Ben, who was a lobbyist. Are you there? Are you there, Ben?
Yeah, I'm here. How you doing?
So you were one of these sort of slippery kind of people who try and get in and find a way to get their deal. So what sort of techniques were you using on this in this venture? What were your tactics there?
Well, it's funny because the way I was involved, I was actually involved via an agency that is about 400 or 500 metres down the road from Parliament. I was media trained by the spokesperson for Cambridge Analytica. It tells you just how deep these people are involved, and how bad it is. They will work for anyone. They have no scruples. To them it's just a job. And they're very, very good at it. You know, these people have a level of skill in this area that I've never seen before, and I've been about a bit in this game. In terms of what I did, I was lucky. I got to be, most recently anyway, I got to be a lobbyist for an industry that I actually believe in, which is vaping. It helps people get off cigarettes and, you know, change their life. So that's why I got involved, because I thought, you know what, this is an industry I can defend legitimately. In the past, I've worked in private education. I worked for a company that was owned by Michael Gove's best mate, Edmund Lazarus, who owns a huge part of the private education sector. So I worked, for example, Southside in London was one of the schools that I was responsible for. You know, these people are very good at what they do. You know, they get what they want. By hook or by crook, they get what they want. To them, it's a case of how much do I need to spend to get the result that I'm after. So I guess in terms of the tactics that they use and the way they get in, it's about connections, it's about knowledge, it's about knowing the right people. You know, if you've got access to SPADs are one of the ways that you get in. So if you look at a minister or, you know, any politician, if you look at their SPADs and where they've come from, that will tell you which industries those ministers or politicians are going to be predisposed towards. So, for example, the water industry was mentioned earlier. And all you had to do was look at the SPADs and the people around said person, and you go, yeah, I can see why they're predisposed in that area. A lot of politicians use, you know, getting elected as an MP or, you know, as a councillor or as a leader of a portfolio in a council, that sort of thing, as a way to, you know, getting a cushy number in an industry, because they'll know all the right people. They'll know the law inside out. They'll know the legislative framework inside out. They'll know, you know, how to get what they want. And that is what the lobbying industry is all about. It's getting what you want. And if you're effective at getting what you want, you'll go far and you'll make an awful lot of money. These guys have seen more money than I've ever seen before. They are paid very well.
If they've got all these resources and all this money, they can kind of manipulate the system pretty easily, can't they? And unless there's regulation. I mean,
yeah.
What Tamasin was saying at the beginning was making it more transparent and accountable, but she said that's about all you can do. I mean, this idea of banning lobbyists is impossible because, as she said, there's good lobbyists and you can't really say who's good or bad, really. But
yeah.
Do you think that that's possible to regulate it, or does it have too much power to even get near to regulating it?
It's a huge question. The difficulty is, I mean, going back to the gagging law and when that was brought in, that was hilarious for me because at the time, you know, I had gotten involved with a campaign to stop HS2 where I was living, because for me it's a huge albatross, not a good you know, thing to get behind. So at the time, the organisation I was involved with was flagging. So I got involved, helped them reinvigorate the campaign, get it back up on its legs. We held a public meeting about that, and you know, we weren't a limited company or anything like that. We were a constituted campaign in the eyes of the law. Registered as a charity. Now, the problem was the gagging law came in and, you know, we held this public meeting and along comes Maggie Throop, Conservative MP, you know, along with her entire team, all of the councillors, you know, from county and borough, you know, as well as all of her SPADs and various other people. And, you know, we're holding this public meeting and she completely derails the thing, you know, absolutely throws it off, you know, uses it as an opportunity to try and, you know, spread a diatribe about HS2 and why, you know, she's for it. And she gave us a potted history of railways. But the key thing that really came out of this was her SPAD came up to myself and the other leader of the campaign and threatened us and said, you know, you personally are liable for tens of thousands of pounds of court fees and damages because you're not on the register of interests for this campaign. You know, you are not you know, registered as lobbyists. And we looked at this and went, what are you on about? And we went away and checked the law, and I realised we were okay with what we were doing and with the amount of money that had gone through our campaign, which was less than £5 grand. You know, we were completely fine. But she was threatening us via her SPAD, you know, to shut down our campaign completely because of this law. Now, because we got a bit of nous about us, we checked it out and we were okay. But anybody else would have walked away and gone, oh my God, we're about to lose our entire livelihood for this. We better stop campaigning. And that's what they do. They use money and fear and power and influence and knowledge to shut down genuine threats to their industry or whatever interest it is that they're actually trying to get put through. You know, and that's just the first part of this. There's so many different levels to what they do.
So what did you think about what Tamasin said about Jeremy Corbyn sort of not having any issue with corporate lobbyists? Do you think if he'd become Prime Minister in, say, 2017, if certain members of the party had all been behind him, do you think he would have been able to cope and survive as a Prime Minister?
No.
No.
I don't like saying that. I'm a Corbynite through and through. I've supported him all the way. But I know he wouldn't have survived because there's too much money to be lost. You can't have somebody who's that much of a threat to the people with all of the power and the money get into the position that he could have got into and not have some kind of blowback. I mean, there was a book film years ago called A Very British Coup, which basically discussed the same thing about somebody who was that much of a threat to the establishment and their money, as Corbyn was. And Corbyn has, in the past 30 years, he has been the single biggest threat to that has existed, simply because he could not be bought. Now, when you've got somebody who can't be bought, when you've got somebody who can't be influenced by the money, the people around you who have the money and the influence start going, well, if we can't buy you, if we can't manipulate you by the people around you, we just have to destroy you. And that's exactly what they did. It wasn't a case of Do you think they destroyed him before he could get in, because instead of destroying him when he got in? Yeah, absolutely. Because it's better to deal with the threat before it actually has any power over you than deal with the threat when it's there in play.
No, I think it's really quite depressing what you're saying, and thank you for that, Ben.
My pleasure.
I'm gonna move on to Brian Basham.
Hello.
Hi, great to see you.
Good to see you.
What do you think about what you've heard so far? Are you what Ben just said about Jeremy Corbyn and what Tamasin said about Jeremy Corbyn? Do you think that he was targeted by lobbyists and the lobby industry, the corporate lobby industry?
Of course he was. Of course he was. Of course he was. Everybody is targeted by lobbyists. I mean, if you say to me, what do I think about people? The man I choose is Stephen Cowan. Everybody's done good well, but Stephen Cowan, should be knighted or canonised or something. He's got it absolutely spot on. Refuses to talk to lobbyists at a local level, and only deals with it doesn't deal with the organ grinder, it deals with the monkey. Doesn't deal with the monkey, deals with the organ grinder. I mean, and he's and he's got his local people trained in negotiation. I used to own a planning lobbying business, and we were very clear about what we were allowed to do. You might take somebody out for a drink, but you didn't go and send them off to Beijing or something. So it's not what lobbyists do. It's not what lobbyists are. I mean, we're all lobbyists. I brought back remembrance for the Royal British Legion and raised 20 million for them, and lobbied hard for military pensions, and post-traumatic stress disorder support. So you've got to be able to present arguments. There's no question about that. It's how you do it, and it's the freebies, the fish and chips, as they call it. That's all wrong. That's really evil. I mean, it's not just the odd lunch. I mean, local people are much more vulnerable than national people, because local people, haven't got as much money. Stephen Cowan's earning 38,000 a year. Well, for somebody earning 38,000 a year, a trip to the theatre, to the opera, to the proms is a big deal. For a national politician, it's not such a big deal. So it ramps up all the time. But the issue of lobbying, to my mind and in my experience, I used to advise Lord King at British Airways, Lord Young, Cleveland Wireless, Lord Anson, a whole load of people. And it's not so much the lobbying, it's how they embed themselves in society. I mean, I just looked it up. In 1987, my company, I had a company called Broad Street Group. It floated or launched KPMG, one of the big four accountancy firms, you know. And the man who I was reporting to, or my team was reporting to, was a man called Ian Barlow. He was a young accountant, young partner, you know. Now, Ian Barlow, let's remember this is 1987. Ian Barlow, very smart bloke, very nice, very personable. He went on to become head of taxation at KPMG. Now, that was the most profitable department. Now, head of taxation means head of not paying tax, so head of tax avoidance. Prem Seeker, who's done a fantastic work with, I've got it here, Austin Mitchell. This document, I don't know whether you can see it, is the Pinstripe Mafia, how accountancy firms destroy societies because they deny us tax revenues. Now, Ian Barlow was head of tax at KPMG. Because it was their most profitable business, he went on to be senior partner. What do you think his next job was? Chairman of HMRC. You can't believe it. So, you know, you talk about they said that Roosevelt made Joe Kennedy chairman of the SEC, and somebody said, why have you made him chairman of the SEC as a crook? He said, well, set a crook to catch a crook. That's legendary. But, you know, what has happened is not so much lobbying, sure, and of course there ought to be rules about it, very strict rules where people go to prison if they transgress. You've got to have it. They had them in States for a bit, but then it was repealed. And what we've got to have is, what we've got to understand is now we have corporate capture. So now, in a way, not in a way, in actual reality, business controls government rather than government controlling business. Government can control business, but it can't actually control business because business is funding government through party political donations and through all sorts of other things. One of my acquaintances was a partner in Goldman Sachs. His name was Richard Sharp. And he was a son of Eric Sharp, Lord Sharp, who was chairman of Cable and Wireless, a man I liked, a man I advised. And when Richard left, Goldman Sachs, he had 1% of the business, which they paid him out £100 million. And he told me, he said, look, I said, what are you going to do when you retire? He said, we have an agreement that we will embed ourselves. I said, what does that mean? He said, we'll become, you know, arts or sport or something. And he became the biggest supporter of Anish Kapoor. I mean, people embed themselves in society. And that's what's happening. One of the things that John McDonald did, who's talked a lot about corporate capture, is he got Professor Prem Seeker, who's actually accepted a seat in the Lords, and he's going to make a stonking speech in October. He got Prem, and I helped a bit, tiny bit, because I think he's the most amazing man. He put together a group of academics, and John McDonald would not let an accountancy firm near him. Now, every other Prime Minister, every other Labour leader, I mean, Tony Blair, I'm crawling all over him all over the place, because they come in and say, we'll help you. And then they've got you. And then they're writing the policy for you. Wow. And then you're completely buggered. And that's how it happens. Government doesn't regulate business. Business now regulates government, I'm telling you. And that's what's happened. So lobbying is lobbying, yeah, sure. Everybody ought to be able to make their case. So I wrote to Hugh Merriman. I'm in Bexhill. I wrote to Hugh Merriman, who's my local MP. He's a Conservative. He's quite a good bloke. He's actually stood up against Johnson this week. And I was writing to him about a tax thing, that, you know, helping small businesses. Small businesses are my thing. And, you know, I'm lobbying him. Nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is if I say to him, hey, you know, come down to my villa in the south of France and we'll spend the year and I've got dancing girls and whatever it is, you know, that sort of thing genuinely happens too. And that's what's wrong. So it's corporate capture we want to be wary of. People embedding themselves in government and making government dependent upon them.
Right. Well, thank you.
By the way, political funding is absolutely, should be completely and utterly banned. We should have the German system, where state funding of political parties takes place, and you get a certain amount. It used to be, such a long time ago since I looked at it, it was 5 Deutschmarks for every voter you had in the previous election. So, you know, and I think last time I looked at the numbers, it would cost to cover all 5 parties something like, I don't know, under 100 million, which is peanuts, you know, in government terms. And you get the grant, and that's it. And you don't go out and get any money from anybody. I was fundraiser for the Labour Party in 1995 with John Norton, who married Mo Molam. And our plan, because the internet was only just coming in really then strongly, and our plan was to bring in lots and lots of small donations. We set up a thing called the 1,000 Club to fuel it, where we had, we wanted 1,000 people giving £1,000, and we raised quite a lot of money. When we set it up and we put on a gala dinner, a lot of people didn't like that, but it was a way of raising money. When we set it up, nobody would pay attention to us. As soon as it looked as though Tony Blair was going to win, we couldn't get a room big enough. Every bank, came to us. Now, we wanted to do small funding, small donations, and that's what's happened, by the way, with Labour. Labour gets a lot of its funding from small donations, which is a bloody good thing. And Jeremy Corbyn is going exactly the right way. When Michael Levy came in, Tony Blair came in, they set up a thing called high donor funding. And they brought in a woman called Amanda Deleu from a Jewish charity, Jewish Care. And Michael Levy, because he had been raising money in the community. And I was sent off to pick up a cheque for £1 million from somebody who was lobbying for the banning of hunting with dogs. Now, I'm all in favour of the banning of hunting with dogs, but you shouldn't be able to buy the bloody legislation. That's the fact. And I went to Margaret Hodge, and I got the letter, and I said, I'm resigning. She said, why? I said, because if somebody gives you 100,000, they want something, they'll give you $1 million, they demand it. And that was, so I left. Yeah.
Well, I could listen to you for much longer, but we've got to get on with some. I've got another speaker who's Esther, who's been on the show before because she's standing for party treasurer in the NEC election. And Esther, you worked as a finance officer in the NHS?
Yeah, finance director in the NHS. In NHS Trust, and then eventually in NHS England in the South region.
So what sort of things did you notice in the NHS? I mean, was it pharma companies or?
Yeah, pharma's a big thing because as you'll all know, general practices, for example, have always been independent contractors, and a lot of their education is funded by pharma. And the other thing to say is that in NHS England, where I worked, we spent a lot of money, billions of pounds a year on drugs. And there were various pieces of research that were funded and supported and lobbied by the Specialist Healthcare Association, which was lobbied by private pharma. So one of the issues in the NHS is there have been so many cuts over the years in regions and also in the Department of Health that a lot of the thinking is outsourced. So when a piece of thinking is required, we look to the private sector to inform us and advise us and help us with our decision making. So the lobbying becomes education, and who would resist education? So there's an example, for those of you who have been around long enough, Lord Ashcroft back in Thatcher days, he had a company that sold cleaning services, and one of the first things that Margaret Thatcher did when she started to privatise the NHS was to outsource contract cleaning. Lord Ashcroft was a major Tory party donor. So the way that this happens is that the thinking is influenced by these people that donate and lobby, and then the policy is formed. So in this case, Ashcroft lobbied Thatcher. Thatcher came up with the idea that we should outsource contract cleaning. The NHS then has a white paper that reorganises it so that cleaning is outsourced and subject to competitive tendering. Lord Ashcroft becomes a billionaire. So the influencing takes place, the policy changes, and then the money is made in a completely legitimate way.
Nicholas, are you there?
Hi. What I wanted to, in terms of lobbying, what I wanted to talk about, because on healthcare, is that basically that corporate corporate vision for healthcare is totally mainstream. It's basically hegemonic. So you have who talks about healthcare, and you have organisations like the King's Fund or the Nuffield Trust, and journals like the Health Service Journal, and they're all functional to these big business interests. The current Richard, I can't remember his surname now. Richard, the guy who's the head of the King's Fund from McKinsey, the guy who was there before, Chris Ham, is one of the people who spent his life, built his career on lobbying for US healthcare models instead of the NHS after being a Blair advisor. So all the voices, and these are the people who all MPs, including Labour MPs, that's who they get their info from. Basically, the worldview that they are given in their briefings comes from those bodies who do a lot of valuable research, but who are, in terms of politics, are committed and work with the government in what they're calling the transformation of the health service that NHS and our friend's former employer is busy with. So, so in that context, it's not even so much prohibiting lobbying, and I mentioned in the chat, Heidi Alexander had a corporate lobbyist working for her, who's the guy who now runs communications for Keir Starmer. And actually, by the way, Jeremy Corbyn had banned shadow cabinet members from employing corporate lobbyists, but she did it anyway, and Keir Starmer did it anyway. And I think it's a big shame, actually, I'm just seeing Ben nodding and remember what he was saying earlier on, that this ban wasn't made public and it wasn't opened up to the membership, because if it had been, it would have been very hard politically for Heidi and Starmer and anyone else to carry on with it, especially because we're talking about healthcare privatisers, people who are committed to that, in a shadow cabinet post where your one job is to defend the health service, not attack it. So that to me was a huge frustration over the last few years, that it wasn't opened up, that the dispute with the Labour right wasn't focused on this in an open way.
Can I just interrupt you?
Go on, interrupt me, please, interrupt me.
Because I probably have to wrap up the discussion, but do you think that Labour members are not aware of the extent of influence of lobbyists within with MPs and SPADs? I mean, Ben was talking about SPADs, and is that something that we should try and get out there as information? Because it seems to, well, I didn't know about Heidi Alexander, and I didn't know about Keir Starmer in some ways. So this is all due to me.
Basically, I think it's something we should be talking about and we should be focusing on, because if for example, we were going to be a party that was going to defend the NHS in government, the first thing is to make sure that we're not doing the bidding of the people who are on the other side, and that starts with even having a perspective from a public service viewpoint that's not shaped by corporate interests, that doesn't tell everything to you, present you the problems to solve that are the problems that the private sector wants solved. We should be talking about this stuff. We should have a culture to deal with it. Yes.
Would you think that for example, it would be a good idea to prohibit SPADs being taken on who had worked for particular companies, because that would obviously mean they're influenced in some way there?
I think that there's an argument for that, in the same way as an MP or so on moving on to such a company. And yes, there's a strong argument for that. But particularly it's a political argument, because it's either you're the party of the NHS or you're one of the parties that's against the NHS. And actually, the Labour Party switched sides under Blair and never really turned back. And Corbyn was a chance to do that, but it didn't really, materialise into something long-lasting. And one way we can do that is to keep talking about this stuff, be aware of it. That if we're going to be working for the many against the influence of the corporate few, then we need to make sure that it's the right people who are in the right place to do that, and not the voices of the people who are supposed to be defeating us, who are being heard first and foremost.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Sure.
I hope everyone enjoyed that discussion on lobbying. I learned a lot from it, just studying what everyone else was saying. And I think we should really address that issue, because we've got to be clean in the Labour Party. We've got to be seen as honourable and doing the right thing. So what did you enjoy the discussion on lobbying? Did you learn anything from that?
Yeah, and it just confirmed what we all thought, that this democracy is just basically run by it's for sale, isn't it? We have the best democracy money can buy, and it's disappointing to think that we vote for people who can't actually make up their mind unless someone takes them out for a free lunch. I kind of hope I'd vote for someone. I can make I'm sure everybody on this programme can make their mind up on the facts without someone buying them a free lunch or fueling them with dancing girls.
The bishop gave his blessing, the actress gave hers too. Servants, wives and sweethearts, every mother knew. You have to do your duty when the empire calls its sons. It was a moral duty to bayonet the Hun. It was a moral duty to bayonet the Hun. Our father gave the orders, the sergeant gave his too. The tabloids and the Sunday papers made sure we all knew. You have to do your duty to protect the family. It is a moral duty, heterosexuality. Oh, it is a moral duty, heterosexuality. Oh, jumble bully boy patriots, you tin pot privileged patriarchs that cheer the corpse and clap the cops that send your children over the top. Morality from hypocrites like you. I don't know if to laugh or if to spew. Roger says reopen, so says the Daily Mail. The Star-Democrat says here, 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 our kids must learn to fail. So teachers, do your duty, forget the PPE. You have a moral duty to die for the economy. You have a moral duty to die for the economy. Morality from hypocrites like you. I don't know if to laugh or if to spew.